Hello everyone, my name is Oliver East and today I'm here to review Azul, Queen's Garden. This is the fourth title in the Azul sort of franchise. Let's see how the game plays and then I'll give you my thoughts on it. At the beginning of the game you're going to have to set up the main scoreboard. Now for most plays it's just a case of putting your cubes of the players on 15 and putting the little marker here. But for your first game you will need to assemble this sort of spinning dial thing. It's a very simple process, but you do need to do that for your first game. All players are going to take a main board and then place one of these starting garden tiles on top of it, in the middle like such, and have a storage board in which they're going to place 3 of these wild tiles down. So that's blocking off the first 3 spaces of your storage. One person is going to start first and then this is put into the general area for whoever's going to pick it up for the second round. To set up the garden tile stack, you're always going to make 4 stacks, but depending on the player count, you're going to make them a certain height. Now for 2-player, we're going to make 4 stacks of 5 tiles. Now these do have a side with a pavilion and a symbol on, and these are going to be face down so you don't know what's in the stacks for now. Once you've taken all of these stacks, this remaining pile goes off to one side as a supply, and you can potentially be using this in the game. To set up the first round, you're going to choose one of the piles, moving the others off to the side, and then draw 4 of the acrylic tiles and place them on top. You'll note that these have both symbols and colours. The aim of the game is to have a beautiful garden via these tiles as well as the garden tiles underneath. So let's see how you actually gain them. On your turn you can do one of 4 actions. The first one is to acquire tiles, be that these colourful acrylic tiles or the garden hexagons. They are all considered tiles for the take tile action. So for instance, what you can do is say one thing and you're going to take all of that as long as you don't take any identical things. So for instance, I could say trees and take these 2 that have trees on them. I could also say light blue and take these 2 light blue tokens. Say instead we had this scenario. I could still say light blue, but I would only be able to take one of these 2 and place it on my storage board because they are identical tiles. Let's say I do take these 2 trees from the main stack. These are going to get added into my storage, which is sat next to my main player board. Now, if this was full, I would not be able to take that option. Because in this case I took from the main stack, it's going to drop down and 4 new acrylic tiles are going to be added to the next tile. Let's say the next player chooses to take these flower symbols. Now they can take all 3 of these because they are of different colour and are of all the same symbol. Again, if there were duplicates across the tiles, you cannot take identical pieces, and these would be added to their storage. If a garden tile is ever empty, it is flipped over. Now in this case, if this was my turn, I could say dark green and take this tile, because that is its symbol currently, and add that to my storage, and also this one and add that to my storage, because you're doing all of that in one take tiles action. Just like when taking symbols at any other time, you cannot duplicate them. So if I was to take dark green, I could either take this or this tile and add it to my storage board. The next action you can take when you have some tiles in your storage is to actually place them onto your main board, and that's what you're going to be scoring points for, so you're going to want to do it. Now each tile has a cost, and these are reminded at the top of the player board. The 3 butterflies, for instance, cost 3 to place them. So let's do that. So I want to place this green tile onto my board, and I can do that in any of the empty green spaces. I can't place it out here, there are no tiles there for me to build on yet. Now I need to pay for that. Again, like with taking things, you cannot use identical tiles to pay for things. So I would not be able to use this tile, but I would be able to use either a group of 3 butterflies that weren't identical, or 3 dark greens that aren't identical. And these would then be paid into the middle pot. Now, if I didn't have enough, I would be able to use wilds, and these are just returned to the pile in the middle of the table. When you have a tile on your board, there is an additional restriction. For instance, if I was building this green single tree, I could build it adjacent because it is either the same colour or the same pattern. But if I was to try and play this light green tree, I would not be able to place it because it doesn't share either characteristic of the tile, not the colour and not the symbol. I could, however, simply play it there. And that would cost me 1 tile because trees are worth 1. Your aim is to build up sections of colour or patterns, and that's going to score you more points, with groups of minimum of 3 scoring you at the end of the game. For instance, I might want to do something like this, because then this group of 3 dark greens are going to score me at the end of the game. Now note, you can't again have 2 identical tiles in the same group. As your middle area starts to fill up, you're going to want to expand your garden with these tiles that you've collected. It works in a very similar way, although there is a second way to do it as well. So, for instance, this is a blue sort of flowery thing, and that's going to be 5 in cost. Now this works in the same way. I wouldn't be able to use this light blue one to pay for it, but these 4 and a wild would allow me to then place this in any orientation I'd like. I wouldn't still be able to do this because these tiles don't share anything, but I could rotate it and do that, for instance, if that's something I wanted to do. The other way to expand your garden will not get you a pavilion or a symbol, and it will cost you 6 points, but you'll take from that stack we set aside at the beginning of the game, but it does have more spaces for tiles. When you go to place a tile and you fully surround one of the features of the garden, you will gain these wild tokens back. So for instance, I've gone around this statue, which will get me 2 of the wild tokens to add back to my supply. The final thing you can do on your turn is to pass, and you can't do any more tile taking or tile placing once you've done that. Once everyone has passed, you will check the items that are scoring for round 1. So for instance, every dark green you have will score 1 point, every tree will score 1 point, and every light blue will score another point. So for looking at this is an unrealistic first round score, but we would score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dark greens, we have 2 trees, and then we have 1 light blue. You then rotate this on towards the next round, and this is what you'll be scoring. And this is double-sided, and these score slightly differently depending on which side you're using. To start the next round, you're going to be taking the next stack. This is going to be a different height depending on your player count, and you're going to add 4 tiles to that to start them off. Whoever passed first in the last round is going to be going first, and so on. At the end of the game, you're going to do bonus scoring on top of what you're scoring from this wheel. You can go down here and go through all of them, and you'll go through every group, even if you've got more than one group of a particular thing. So for instance, if I had 2 dark green areas that are larger than 3, I would score both of them. To score, you will look at the group and count up the values of those tiles. Again, they are reminded at the top of the player board because that makes it a little bit easier. If you have the perfect group of 6 of a colour, it's going to score you a total of 21 points, but there's a bonus if you've managed to make a group of 6 additional points. So this would score me 27. I only have 2 trees here, which means unfortunately they are not a group of 3 and will not score me any points. They may have scored me points throughout the game though. Even though this green was used during the dark green scoring, it will still score when it comes to this symbols group. To score that, it's worth 5 points, so that's 3 for 15 points. Players unfortunately will lose points for what's left on their storage, so you're going to want to empty this as much as possible. For instance, this is going to be losing me 5 points because it's worth 5. The same for this, whereas these 3 butterflies are losing me 3 points. The wilds will gain you a point back for each you haven't used though. Whoever has scored the most wins, and you have hopefully got a rather pretty looking garden. So let's start off with the components. Now, I have a couple of issues with them as well as a couple of praises to give. Azul, as usual, has some lovely, colourful, acrylic-y sort of tiles. They are really nice to sort of get your hands on and play around with. And when you're dropping them into the tower or just sort of putting them out, the noise, the clacking of them, it sounds really nice. Now, when you're actually putting them onto your player board, they can move around a bit. And this is sort of doubled down by the fact you've got a very thin player board, a very thin side storage board. And then on top of that, you've got tiles, the garden tiles, and then on top of that, you've got these acrylic tiles. So a little bit of a nudge on the table, or even just as you're putting them down, can sort of muck things up. I've not had any sort of game-ending problems where I've moved tiles around, but I could see a big enough nudge that being a problem. There's also one component which is the scoreboard, which has this sort of spinny thing. It's nice, but it's not really needed. Now, one thing is that this is a double-sided board, so you actually have to basically unattach that spinner and reattach it to get the slightly different scorings on either side. Now, it's nice that there's 2 scorings, but for the sake of having maybe just a thicker scoreboard, that spinning thing, it feels like it was meant to do more. It feels like they'd originally gone, right, you rotate it and like so much each time, and it can maybe vary what it is in every game. But in the final product, actually, it's just you rotate it for the 4 rounds. Let's move on to something slightly more important to many than the components, because you can upgrade those if you really want. Well, what about the gameplay? The central choosing of tiles is quite a nice one. It does feel very loosely reminiscent of the other Azul titles, but it is no way near as sort of clean, simple to explain and streamlined. Gone is the idea of you just take all of one colour and then slide the rest to the middle. You've got to take some maybe off this tile, this tile, this tile, oh not that one because it's identical. Then you've taken some from the middle stack, so you've got to move it and repopulate that with some more tiles. Oh, it's a lot for what it needs to be. One of the great things in the other Azuls is once you've put the tiles out, they're all the tiles for the round. So you can kind of think ahead, think, oh, I wouldn't mind those, I wouldn't mind that. And all the setup is done before the round begins. Because of every time you take something from that middle stack, you have to add to it, it just feels like you're constantly doing a little bit of setup, move this, a little bit more setup. And it just sort of maybe disrupts the flow. Obviously, if you've got multiple players that are helping out doing that, and it's not just you, it does ease things because you're not having to do it all the time. But it's just, it takes what was a very simple choosing of tiles selection, and it's just made it that little bit more complicated. I think it needed to though, because one of the great things about this game is you can go for the colours or the symbols. And that's not something that's been seen in the Azul series before. And it does give that bit of extra choice. I want some of those tiles. How can I try and get them? Now I could say, maybe as an example, if I'm taking light blue, I could get the 2 that I wanted and that one over there. But if I say trees, I'd get one of the light blues, the one I really wanted, and get 3 other trees. That's going to allow me to play a lot of tiles. Maybe I'll do that. And I like that sort of concept. The only thing that really sort of didn't need to be there is that idea of you can't use the same tile to pay for itself. You remove that rule and just say it needs to be a set of colours or symbols, and that little rule complication just makes the whole game that much easier to explain, because 9 times out of 10 you've accidentally picked, a new player will have accidentally picked up 2 identical tiles, maybe one from a garden tile and one from the sort of the acrylic-y ones, and then it's sort of stuck on their player board, and then that's losing them points at the end, unless they can work out a way to get rid of it. Yeah. You don't necessarily have the super screwing each other over that you did from like the original Azul. You are kind of very much focused, because you kind of have to be, the extra sort of brain power, focused on I need these tiles to be able to place this onto my board. And it does mean it's a bit more of a, to me, it felt a bit more of a multiplayer solitaire, even though you're very much interacting with what's in the middle together, and people could take the tiles you want. We never really found that we were doing it on purpose. We very much found that we were doing it, I need those 2 tiles because they're both light blues, and then someone goes, oh, I needed that flower symbol, and you're like, oh, I didn't even notice that's what you were going for. So we kind of were stumbling and tripping each other up accidentally, whereas some of the other Azuls, certainly the original, it was always, oh, I could leave you with a lot of blues that you don't, or reds or whatever that you don't need, so I'm going to just take this and you're going to have to take them. But in this game, it felt often that you were just trying to take as much as you could, and we often would clear the market just to try and get as much as we could to then place as much as we could. Because getting stuff actually onto the tiles is super satisfying. Getting those sets to score, not from the intermediate round scoring, which is a few pence here and there in the grand scheme of things. It's 1 point here for a few yellows, a couple of points for your light blues or whatever, your light greens, your dark greens, then your purples score 2. Great. You're not getting many points from that. But getting the points, the tiles down to score big points at the end of the game, that's a lot of fun. There's another problem here though with Azul, Queen's Garden, is that it can be very hard to get a lot of tiles down. The big scoring 6-point tiles score 6 but cost 6 to get played. To actually get a group of those down, it takes a long time, and it's kind of a bit lackluster when you sit back and you're like, wow, I've spent 2 rounds and I've managed to place like 3 tiles down, and your opponents have got like 10 down because they've gone for their little 1s or 2s. The 1s or 2s look much more satisfying, and to be honest, it's much easier to get that bonus 6 points for having a set of 6 single point trees. So yes, some people are going to enjoy that because there is that sort of logic based system of I'm taking this to be able to play that, and then I can move this to my board, and it's a good system. But just to me, the fun bit of placing tiles you can be held back from doing that. So lovely colourful tiles that sit on thin boards. I'm not sure I'd want to play this at a full player count. Like 2 players, it's much quicker going back and forth. There's a lot of waiting between turns any higher than that because there's a lot more analysis paralysis. And all of this builds together for me to say this is a 6.5 out of 10. I kind of wish I enjoyed it more because it's almost there. I like the fact that the colours have symbols and you could take the symbols or take the colours. There's just a couple of rules that just trip people up, make it harder to teach, harder to get to the table, and it can be a little unsatisfying at the end depending on sort of what you've gone for. And that means it's not going to hit the table over the other Azuls to me. Anyway, that has been Azul Queen's Garden. And until next time, check out other news, reviews and such on the Dice Tower.